Good afternoon, my name is Colm Moloney. I'm a third-year graduate entry medical student in UCD, and I'm also the graduate entry rep to RAMI for UCD. I'm going to be talking about effectively communicating your work through your poster. So the reason I'm here speaking to you today is that I actually used to be quite an anxious public speaker, but in the last few years, I was working a job which had me regularly speaking to between 60 and 120 people. So I would definitely recommend, where possible, even if it's just PBL, like problem-based learning, get involved in the conversation, and just more exposure will kind of reduce that. I also improve by focusing on some of the specific elements that Anurag and Basil have already talked about. So my aim today is to impart some of these tips over the next 15 minutes or so. In terms of content, we'll be focusing on two key areas, which are essentially the elevator pitch and how the design of the poster interacts with your communication. The elevator pitch is really based around introducing a brief, simple, but engaging narrative with high impact. So that is absolutely key. For the poster appearance and graphs, there are two key areas, which is the poster design, which Basil and Anurag already talked about. And then what I'm going to talk a bit more about is the way you interact with your poster then. Planning the design of the poster, you should try and craft it into a narrative format, because ultimately narratives are easier to grasp than pure data. As we've seen, just throwing data at the viewer is just going to overwhelm them and they won't be able to take it in. When you think about narrative in literature, it's very similar to how you're crafted for your poster. So in a narrative in literature, you've got a setting. So in other words, a clinical context with a given population. There's an incident, i.e. a clinical problem. And then you need to get a scale of the problem. So the reader needs to feel invested in literature, and they need to know why your research is important, and they need to feel that it's worth stopping and listening to out of the other 200 posters that they could be looking at. In literature, again, you have a character arc and resolution, and that is key to the narrative when it comes to your research, because there needs to be a contrast between what the state of the research was before your research, what was the scientific body like before your work, and then what is it like after, because what was the point in your research? And then set up for a sequel, as you would have in literature. So that is, what further research can be done? What can be improved on your methodologies? Ultimately, creating a narrative is great, but don't misrepresent the science. Don't oversimplify it. So here's a template for crafting a narrative around your research. Naturally enough, it follows an introduction, methods, results, and conclusions. What you need to keep and why you must address it. That's key to having in there. The current paradigm is what is included, what was the scientific body before your work, and then you need to talk about who was trying to address this issue and what did they find, because you're then going to compare this with your research. You're then going to look at what methodology do you use, but more importantly, what was good about this methodology? Is it novel, or is it well supported within the literature? Results, naturally enough, what did you find? Conclusions, then how did this change the paradigm? So then you're going to go full circle comparing your conclusions against what was the previous known area in your area of research then. I'd like to then finish on something I call food for thought, which is essentially that you're going to pick something, try and pick something essentially profound, that when the person walks away from your research, they're going to walk on to the next poster and they're still going to be thinking about your research. So something that just walks away and keeps your work in the back of their mind then. So we see these all the time when we're in hospital and we're presenting to a consultant or an SHO. It's like patient case studies, they're natural narratives. So you start with the presenting complaint. Why is the patient here today? What's the inciting incident? You then look into the history of that, and then you delve into the patient's history. What is their medical history, their surgical history? And then you go right through onto the prognosis. So what does the future hold for this patient? That's kind of your food for thought there, is your prognosis. So realistically, we see these all the time. It's a narrative crafted around a particular individual story, and your research, it should be something similar enough. So when it comes to your research, the PICO layout, that's the natural narrative. You've got a population of interest, such as patients with CML, an intervention, such as the testing the use of imatinib as a therapy, a comparison, which is comparison against the next best standard of care, and then overall survival is your outcome then. So you can then just add an introduction and results and conclusions, and then you've got a very easy basic elevator pitch around the PICO layout, which is something very useful to use when you're trying to give the speech structure to your poster. When it comes to speech, this is essentially the holy trinity of public speaking. So we talked about style. I think it should be conversational because you don't want it to be stilted and robotic. You're not reading the Soviet Evening News. You're just talking about your research, one person to maybe 3 or 4 others then. Substance, use clear takeaway facts. That's essential because you need to get across your message within 3 to 4 minutes. Impact, this is the most important bit. Impact, that's about making explicit that in a given group of people, you will see a given outcome under a given set of circumstances. So when you finish your presentation, your viewers should walk away and they should be able to summarize in one sentence what is the main point and what was the outcomes. So impact, what is your main thesis statement? They should walk away and be able to summarize that once you're finished then. When you're speaking about your poster, follow the KISS model, so keep it short and sweet. This is all about feeding bite-sized bits of information to your audience. Really, again, the key is limiting what you're saying. You're going to limit what's on your poster to the bare essentials and limit what you're saying as well. So the way you do this, that's by building on what's called topic sentences. When I'm writing an essay, I would start with a topic sentence. So that's a sentence that expresses the main idea of the paragraph. That's followed then by a subtopic sentence that'll further explain what the topic sentence is about. And then more subtopic sentences. These can be just easily digested facts which either support or add nuance to the main idea. And then a conclusion sentence that ties the ideas together neatly. So within that, you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then if you want, you can add kind of a transition sentence that allows you to smoothly move from one section to the next. So you should be able to structure your introduction something like this, either written on your poster or how you're going to speak about your poster then. So here's an example of what this looks like. Again, you introduce your topic with a topic sentence. So we're talking about antibiotic resistance within the health service, economy, and society as a whole, and why it requires a strong response. So the following sentences should relate exactly to that. So again, we're going to start talking about farming and patients and finishing prescriptions, how that's increased the problem. And then we're going to talk about where the problem's coming from. Again, that's relating back to our topic sentence. And then we start talking about giving some facts about the impact that it'll have on society with potential death toll, and then the impact it'll have on the economy and society. Again, we're relating back to our beginning section here. And then to conclude, it's just kind of a sentence that draws it all together, which essentially reiterates the topic sentence in a slightly new rephrased way. And then you can go on to a transition sentence, which brings you into your methodology then. If you want to make your pitch that little bit easier, you can do so by focusing not just on what you say, but on the poster design, which was touched on quite heavily earlier. So again, this is kind of reiterating some of the points. So what makes the poster work? Firstly, a clear topic sentence in both your speech and the poster. It keeps the aim of your elevator pitch clear. You can use color, as we said. Basil touched on that quite a lot. Use it sparingly, as he said. It gives it sort of a ladybird effect that draws your attention in. Text size, use a bit more sparingly, and same with text formatting. Graphic design and the blocking, like graphic design, a really key element here. Blocking, so that was touched on as well by Basil. So we can see here, it's just about simple symmetry, making it easy aesthetic on the eyes. You've got 3 blocks here. You've got one block here, second one here, and then the third block is made up by the 2 smaller ones then. Next, we have the concept of implicit and explicit importance. Explicit importance, the presenter, me, I'm going to tell you what is important. Implicit importance, the way the information is presented tells you what is important. So in this sign here, I can see it as danger. There's a toxic hazard. I know that there's a danger and a toxic hazard because the words have explicitly told me. And then I know there's something to be aware of it because I've got this color contrast here with the red against the white and the yellow against the white. And then I've got text formatting here with an exclamation mark here and then in the bottom corner there. And then there's obviously a big skull and crossbones in the middle. So explicitly and implicitly, this poster has told me to watch out for a dangerous toxic hazard. As Anurag already mentioned, graphs and graphics, they're massively important to designing your poster. And the best way to kill your poster is to overload it with too much text. A good graphic can do a lot more talking than all the words you're going to put on your poster. Really, the text should play a supporting role, using that 60-40 kind of model that we were talking about earlier. If you want to make the poster work for you, I recommend using what I call the art gallery model. So most of the time, the graphic is not just there to look nice. The best use of the graphic is where the graphic acts as the talking point. So for example, if you were in an art gallery, you would focus on the use of lighting, the use of different colors, the reflection from the rain, the characters in the center, and the brush stroke. So I'm actually focusing the attention onto the graphic. It's one way to use a graphic, not all graphics have to do this. And I think particularly graphs are a really good way of doing that. They can tell your narrative for you. So, you know, you can be talking about the different trends within the graph and craft a narrative with a beginning, middle, and an end, comparing and contrasting the start, end, and middle points within that. Same thing here. We want to see that impact that you're trying to convey within the graph. If the graph can tell the entire narrative, all the better. So just a final tip, if you need to pause or have any difficult questions, or genuinely your mouth is just dry, you can buy yourself a little time with a sip of water. And I'd say don't be afraid of pausing either, because it shows that you're not nervous, you're not rushed, and you're able to take your time. And you should have a good presentation then. In summary, just when it comes to your poster, analyze your own research. It's the work you've already done. Divide it into the relevant topics using that style, substance, and impact, making sure that impact is really clear through a narrative format, and then use clear topic sentences and build strong graphics, and that should give you a strong presentation then. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.